All right, here in the second section, we are going to talk about the second heir of Rome, which is going to be the Islamic Empire. Yes, from about 570 to 650. Now, about the rise of the Islamic Empire, we have to consider the origins of Islam. And please keep in mind that I am not a practitioner of Islam, so you're not going to get a specialist point of view on this. But what is Islam? The actual definition of Islam is submission. And the main goal of the religion is to submit oneself completely to the will of God. In Arabic, the word for God is Allah. So the founder of this religion is a man by the name of Muhammad, who was born somewhere around the year 570. Muhammad is from the city of Mecca in Arabia. Mecca was already an important city before Muhammad was born. The reason why it was important was because it was a major center of trade. It was also a major religious center. The early people of the Arabian Peninsula had found a black stone. It was probably a meteor rock, but they believed that this stone was the sacred stone sent to them by the gods. So they protected this black stone in a structure known as the Kaaba. And you can see an image of the Kaaba here. And people would come from all over the Arabian Peninsula to Mecca to worship at the Kaaba. Now, Muhammad was orphaned as a child, so he grew up in the care of his clan, the Qurayshi clan. And the Qurayshi clan was known for their jobs in commerce, but also in protecting the Kaaba. So Muhammad gets a job as a caravan trader, and he works for the wealthy woman named Khadijah. Eventually, he marries Khadijah. She's a widow, and he marries her, and he is rising, in prosperity. He's making his way in business, but he feels unfulfilled. So Muhammad starts going out into the desert, and he comes back to his wife and reports that he has been having visions of the angel Gabriel. He writes down what this supposed angel tells him, and these visions become the basis for the holy book of Islam, which is known as the Quran. Now, you can look at the religion of Islam. It can be summarized with its basic confession of faith, which is there is no God but Allah. And Muhammad is his prophet, and that is what people say when they want to convert to Islam. You have to say it in Arabic, which I don't know and wouldn't say in Arabic even if I could. But you can see how it focuses on some of the key aspects of Islam. First of all, there is only one God. So this was very different from the Arabs at the time who were polytheistic. But the importance of Muhammad is his prophet, which essentially means that from the perspective of Islam, Muhammad is the person who is giving the final revelation from God, God's final word. Now, in practice, Islam has many religious practices that are strikingly similar to other Western religions like Judaism and Christianity. Muslims focus on times of prayer. They actually have regimented times of prayer each day. They focus on fasting, charity, and pilgrimage as well. And you can find, as Christians and Jews, that we also engage in these practices as well. So even though Islam has some similar religious practices to Christianity, when it comes to their theology, that is, their beliefs, we find that they're very different from the Christian beliefs. While Muhammad claims that Allah, the one God that he worships, is the same God that is worshipped by Christians and Jews, really the religions are very dissimilar. When we take the Christian perspective on Islam, we can see that that is not the final revelation from God, but in fact it is a false religion. So from a Christian perspective, we have to start with the biblical text. And we go back to the biblical text from the Apostle John 14:6, where people are asking Jesus, who Jesus is, and Jesus responds, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So from the Christian focus, we have the story of Jesus, and Jesus being the Son of God. He is God, and he's the only one that can save us from our sins. And so here, Jesus is saying that he is God, and that no one can come to the Father except through Jesus Christ. And Jesus does not make an appearance in Islam, but Muslims view Jesus simply as a prophet, as a good man, but not the Son of God. So right here, we have a disconnect between the Bible and what Islam preaches. According to the Bible, Jesus is God. According to Islam, he is not. The second thing that we see is a text from Galatians. The Apostle Paul is writing to a church in Galatia, and he's kind of chastising them because they are falling victim to false beliefs. And he's writing this long before Muhammad has been born. But it's very interesting that he writes this to the church. He tells them, I'm really astonished. I'm amazed that you're so quickly deserting the one who called by the grace of Christ, and are being turned to a different gospel, which is really no gospel at all. In other words, you're not following the truth. Evidently, some people are throwing you into confusion. You're trying to pervert the gospel of Christ. And here's the really interesting part. But even if we call rights or an angel from heaven should preach the gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be eternally condemned. In other words, Paul is saying that if somebody is preaching something other than what the gospel says, which is that everybody's fallen into sin, we're separated from God, Jesus came, paid the penalty for our sin on the cross, he's resurrected, and we believe that in Jesus and confess that he's Lord, that he will save us and we will be able to be reconciled to God. This is the gospel message. And Paul says, if anybody's preaching something different, even if it happens to be an angel, it's not the truth, and you should turn away from it and run away very fast. And so Paul is writing this long before Muhammad. So if you read through Muhammad's story, saying that an angel from heaven, Gabriel, tells him a different message from God, and yet that message from God is very different from the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So from the Christian perspective on Islam, Islam is not a true religion. Now, this is not to say that Christians should treat Muslims unkindly, but it is simply to point out that there is a huge difference in terms of what Christians believe and what Muslims believe. It's very important to know that it's Muhammad who starts the religion of Islam. His successors are going to be known as the caliphs. And when Muhammad dies, there's a struggle over who's going to succeed him. And this would lead to a split in Islam over the issue of succession. There's two groups of Muslims who split over the issue of succession. On one hand, you have the Sunni Islam and the Sunni Muslims, and they believe that any one of Muhammad's close followers could become his successors. They support his father-in-law, Abu Bakr, to be his successor. And ultimately, they are the ones who are victorious. But a minority who are kind of split off from the majority, and they will follow what becomes known as Shia Islam, which they believe, and they become the Shiite Muslims, and they believe that there's only a blood relative of Muhammad should be the leader of Islam, and so they support Ali, who's Muhammad's cousin. Now, as we say, they're in the minority, and over time there will be two other theological differences that develop between the two. But the split continued until this very day, and in fact can cause problems in the Middle East, because sometimes you'll find that, say, in Iraq, there are a lot of Sunni Muslims, but in Iran, there's a lot of Shiite Muslims. And so those two countries don't really get along, in part because of this religious differences between the two. However, as we said, the Sunni Muslims are the majority. And so the initial group leaves Abu Bakr and the leaders like Abu Bakr and Umar, these people who are part of the Sunni Muslim group, and they will have great success with expanding the reach of Islam. This expansion is going to take place in a little less than 100 years. Now, when we think about Islam and expansion and warfare, probably the term that comes up to American minds is the term jihad. And you've heard the term jihad, you've probably heard it, and people will translate saying that it refers to a holy war. But more literal translation of jihad is actually the word striving. And if you read through Muhammad's teaching on jihad, most of his teachings regarding jihad refer to the internal striving. That is, he'll use jihad to talk about how we fight a kind of holy war within ourselves and to submit ourselves to the will of our law. And there is an external component to jihad as well, which is you have to strive against the enemies of the faith, which externally for Muhammad is not actually who you might think it is. Because we live in a very different time period. We tend to think that Muslims would be fighting against Christians, but at the time, in the early 600s, we find that these holy wars are actually being fought against the Arabs. So Muhammad's initial striving against the enemies of the faith referred to the polytheistic Arabs tribes who was trying to convert to the belief in one God, Allah. So this means that when he encounters Christians and Jews, he feels like he's already a step ahead of the game, because Christians and Jews are both monotheistic, though Muhammad and the rest of the Muslims really have difficulty figuring out the concept of the Trinity in Christianity, because you say we worship one God, but then we talk about the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. They're going, wait, how can you have three in one? And this sort of causes all sorts of confusion for them. But they do, in fact, have a great deal of respect for Christians and Jews, and in fact, they call Christians and Jews people of the book. And Muhammad does kind of make the claim that God did speak to the Jewish people and gave them a revelation, which he would call the Old Testament, or you might call the Hebrew Bible. And Muhammad says that God spoke to Christians, and God gave Christians a revelation called the New Testament, which is the part of the Christian Bible. So because they had revelations from God, they get some respect from Muhammad and the caliphs as well. However, Muhammad will say that both Christians, and Jews didn't get it right. And so that's why God had to speak to him. and that his was the final true revelation. Now, we've already talked about theologically that doesn't really mesh with all Christianity because, Christianity says Jesus is the final revelation. But because Muhammad views Christians as people of the book, he will actually treat them fairly tolerantly as the Muslims start to expand. So take a quick moment to review this map to see how Islam is expanding under the caliphs. Notice how it's starting here in Arabia, like Mecca and Medina, and then it starts to expand outward into North Africa. Remember the part, and this is part of it in the Middle East here, and this is part of the Byzantine Empire. So it's also expanding beyond the Byzantine Empire into the remnants of the old Persian Empire. So this is the area of modern-day Iraq, Iran is kind of up here. And you're kind of going to go further into North Africa and eventually start heading into Europe in the year 711 when the Muslim push into Spain. So the thing to kind of notice is that the Islamic Empire is going very, very quickly. It's expanding incredibly rapidly. It's going to create a fairly sizable territory. And it's the expansion into Western Europe that's going to have a bit of an impact on the development of Western Europe. Because when the Muslims move into Spain, this is going to allow for some trade to go on as well. And we're going to find that in the Middle East, we're going to see trade developing between the Italians and the Muslims who are living in the Middle East. And so we will see that Islam is going to have a positive impact on Western Europe in terms of that they also have contacts in China, and they're going to be making contacts with people in India and bringing those Asian goods to Western Europe. And so that's going to bring a lot of new trade to Western Europe. There are new technologies that they're going to eventually bring, not just their trading contacts, but by the time we get to the end of medieval period, they have brought technologies like the compass and gunpowder and early printing technologies. And they're going to bring all of these technologies from Asia into Western Europe. And so that's very significant. Another significant thing that Islam does is it preserves Greek and Roman knowledge. So as the Islamic Empire expands into the Byzantine Empire, it preserves the Greek and Roman knowledge that it finds there. So the Muslims, they respect Christians. They see them as people of the book. They see their literature as something worth reading and worth preserving. So they will preserve it. Especially, they will preserve Aristotle. And that becomes very important. A lot of copies of Aristotle were lost in Western Europe, but they're kept in the Byzantine Empire. And when the Muslims conquered the Byzantines, they keep those texts. They even read them, and they add their own commentaries to them and kind of try to expand on the knowledge base of the Greeks and the Romans. And then during the time period of the Crusades, when the Crusaders go to the Middle East, they'll encounter all this new knowledge again and bring it back to Western Europe. So Islam serves a very positive, important role in the preservation of knowledge. The Muslims are also important for bringing mathematical advancements to the Western Europe. Remember, we said that we have contact with people in Asia, and some of these Muslim merchants are making contacts with people from India. And it's the people from India who come up with concepts like zero and also the numerical system that changes the Roman numerals, who kind of all look like letters, into Arabic script, Arabic numerals. And it's the number system we're most familiar with. And it actually should be called the Hindu numeral system because it's people from India who first develop it. But Muslims who learn it from the Indians and they bring it to Western Europe, and because they get the numerical system from the Muslim traders, they call it the Arabic numeral system. And of course, that's what we use in math today because you can't imagine doing math problems if they were all letters, right? It'd be ridiculous. So we also find that Muslim mathematicians are creating new forms of mathematics like algebra. In fact, the term algebra is an Arabic word. So if you really hate college algebra or algebra 2 or algebra 1 or whatever algebra you're taking, you now know that you're a bigot because you don't like Muslims. No, I'm just kidding. But it was them who came up with these mathematical advances to Western Europe. So again, a very positive impact. But there's also negative impacts that Islam has, and this fear of conquest that develops. So because the Muslims are expanding so rapidly as we saw on the previous slide, in less than 100 years, they're kind of spreading from the Arabian Peninsula into Spain, and this is happening very quickly. So this creates on the part of the Western Europeans the sense that Muslims are going to, get them, and they want to take over all Western Europe. And this is going to create a very negative kind of impact on Western Europeans. They're going to be very quick to believe that Muslims are out to get them and that Muslims want to destroy them. And we know that when Muslims conquer Christian areas, they generally treat them fairly tolerantly. They force Christians to pay a special tax called a head tax. And while it's a tax, it's kind of a penalty tax because they're not Muslim, but it also means that they don't have to serve in the Muslim army. And so for the most part, Christians are tolerated, though we do find it depends on which ruler's in charge. Not all rulers are great, but theoretically, Christians are supposed to be treated quite well in Muslim areas. But for the Christians, they don't know this, and because there isn't a great deal of contact between Western Europe and the Muslim world, outside of trade, this makes the vast majority of Western Europeans willing to believe that Muslims are out to get them, and this is in part going to explain why Europeans are going to be interested in going on the Crusades. And we can see here how Islam is considered to be, an heir of Rome, because it really does take over parts of the territory that used to belong to the Roman Empire. It preserves Greek and Roman knowledge, and it adds its own culture as well. So we're seeing that Rome does have a major lasting impact throughout the Mediterranean world. And that's going to bring us an end to this presentation, this section.